I'm Trace Barnett, welcome to Garden Party, and today we're planting tomato plants, my favorite day of the year. So two things to take into consideration before you start plopping your tomatoes into the ground is the temperature of the air and the temperature of the soil. You want the air temperature to be 60 plus degrees, and you also want your soil temperature to be 50 plus degrees. The soil temp is really important because if you pop a tomato in the ground when it's a little too cold, it's going to stunt the growth, it's going to sit there, not give you any tomatoes. And that's not the kind of tomato plant we want in the garden. Now, when you are looking for tomato plants to purchase, or if you've started them from seed yourself, there are a couple things to take into consideration when you're purchasing them. And the most important thing is the stem and the leaves. So let me remove one of these from our sale selection here. And I can already tell by looking at this tomato plant that it's super healthy. One being is it has a really good thick stem that's just light purple in color. That means that stem is very viable. I can also see that most of the leaves here are in healthy condition and ready to go. You can see some of the smaller leaves are yellowing, and that doesn't matter because we'll cut those off later. Another thing to look for is you can see here on the bottom of my 6-pack is you can see fully formed roots coming out from under the 6-pack. That simply means that this plant has a really good healthy root system and it's ready to go in the ground. If you haven't already checked out our seed starting video, you should follow the link in the description, and you can see these tomatoes as they emerge from seedlings onto these beautiful large plants that are ready for planting now. A great thing about starting your tomatoes from seed is it makes them much more vital when you plant them out in the ground here. They're already more disease and pest resistant. Another great thing is because I live in the middle of nowhere, so I'm very limited on where I can buy my tomato plants. So starting them yourselves, like we did in our first video, is a great way to open the door to tomato possibilities. So find varieties that work best for you, work best for your area. You might not be able to find those in your big box stores, but if you start them from seed, the possibilities are endless. So before we put our tomatoes in the ground, one thing I like to do is take just a bit of compost, and I'm going to sprinkle that compost all in the planting area for my tomatoes, and I'm simply going to smooth that out with a pitchfork. You want a good layer of compost on the soil that you're going to be planting your tomatoes in, and you roughly want 2 to 3 inches of compost on that soil. So once you have your compost in an even layer, you want to use a ruler and space out your tomatoes. Spacing is very important when you're growing tomatoes because you want ample space in between each plant for airflow. That's going to really help with mildews, blights, and also pests. Now, a general rule of thumb is I usually leave between 24 and 36 inches in between my tomato plants. It also is going to depend on the variety of plant also. This is another good time to reference the back of your stake, your plant stake that has all of that information there for you. So one thing I like to do is I will lay my ruler directly out on the ground. This is one of those good times when you have rocks to go ahead and kind of discern where you want to plant your tomato. And then I'm going to go ahead and just give a little bit of a dig right there. Now, to start, tomatoes are deep rooters, so they need a really good, deep, sufficient hole to grow in. So I'm going to use a hand trowel, and I'm really going to dig deep down in there so the tomato roots have a really nice, good start on a foundation. Tomatoes are calcium and phosphorus lovers, so I'm going to take a few eggshells here, and I'm going to just break those up and put those directly into the hole there, because what that's going to do is it's going to give us a nice boost of calcium as our tomatoes are laying roots in the ground. So I'm going to remove these little suckers here. So a sucker is a leaf that grows on a tomato that basically pulls energy from the plant root system and stalk itself. And tomatoes have a wonderful ability to where they can actually root all the way up to the stalk. So I'm going to cut off all of these leaves here, all the way up until it becomes major leaves here at the top. So I'm going to hold my tomato here and I'm going to start pulling dirt around it. I'm going to leave sufficient room between the dirt and the leaves. So I'm mounding my tomato up in a sense and mounding the dirt up around our plant here. One, that's going to stabilize the plant in case we have any winds that may come through. It's also going to give the plant a sturdy foundation to grow from. It's also going to cause water to come off of the mound and kind of pool right here in this little area that I've made with my hands. That's going to allow the water to kind of sit there and just seep down into the ground onto the roots of that tomato. I'm also going to take a little bit of pine straw here. I prefer pine straw because it's inexpensive, it's cheap, it's not as heavy and hard to deal with as mulch. And I'm going to mulch around that tomato just like so. What that's going to do is it's going to retain moisture as our tomato matures. It's also going to prevent dirt from getting caught and trapped all over these young leaves. And if that happens, if you see your tomato in the garden having dirt that's just all over the leaves, you need to remove those leaves because that leaf will end up rotting and falling off anyway. So now that we have our tomato in the ground, now let's talk about staking. So there's a couple different kind of tomato stakes out there. This is probably the one that you're most familiar with. You need your stakes to be a good 3 to 4 foot tall because a lot of tomatoes grow vertically super high, especially when they're in the right conditions. And you want to have ample room to stake those up as they grow. Another option too, and especially if you're planting a ton of tomatoes, is I'll simply make a cage out of dog wire. You don't want to use chicken wire or anything, it's just a little too flexible. So make yourself a dog wire cage and it's pretty inexpensive and it will help stretch your budget as you stake your tomatoes. So once your tomato has reached a height of 1 foot plus, go ahead and start attaching it to your stake with just a little bit of hay baler's twine, some kind of soft jute. There's also plenty of other staking strings out there specifically for tomatoes, but I can tell you they're not that choosy. If you see that your tomato has yellowing leaves toward the bottom, that's a normal thing. Simply just take your tomato scissors, cut those off, and if you have a huge planting of tomatoes, it's better to keep a lot of those underlying leaves trimmed off because what that's going to do is going to allow airflow, which is again going to keep our tomatoes from becoming susceptible to mildews and pests. Now, as far as watering goes for your tomato, directly after planting, you are going to want to water this probably every day for about 10 days. After that, you can kind of fall off once it has a root system that is sufficiently in the ground. And I would say water it a couple times a week if it's in the really hot, blaring summer. And this is the point in time when I tell you that this is going to be your eye that's going to tell you when you should water, what you should do. If you ever see drooping leaves, definitely give the tomato some water. Tomatoes require 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day. I would avoid planting them around tall shrubs, trees, buildings. You really want that full, ample sunlight so we can get those bright, beautiful red tomatoes. Stay tuned with us for Garden Party and watch this tomato plant grow. See what kind of tasty tomato recipes we whip up in the kitchen once it starts to fruit. Be sure and comment on what your favorite type of tomato to grow is and what you do with that tomato. Do you can it, make a tomato pie, make a tomato sandwich? Let us know what you're doing in your kitchen. Now, I'm back. Pitchfork tried to run away. Wish that would have hit me in the head. That would have been like perfect. So now that we have our tomato in the ground, let's talk about, I lost that hole. We're back. Okay. So we have no questions. You want your soil temperature to be, I like the duck though, it don't matter.